What a wild housing market we have right now. So for example, there's approximately 450,000 fewer houses for sale nationwide compared to the average November in 2017 through 2019. However, housing inventory is still rising, which is highly unusual for this time of year because normally the number of houses for sale tend to decrease in November. Of course, part of the reason why inventory has been on the rise though is because the number of newly listed houses for sale just increased from a year ago, the first time that's happened in about 17 months. So in today's video, I'm going to share a brand new report from Realtor.com that was actually just announced today, which covers the entire month of November. I love this because we have to wait 3 weeks in order to have other companies report the latest trends. So for example, according to the National Association of Realtors, or NAR, they will not publish November's numbers for another 3 weeks. And before we get started, I invite you guys to subscribe to this channel if you haven't done so already. Help us reach 100,000 subscribers. I appreciate you guys so much for supporting my YouTube channel, by the way, as well. So thank you so much for tuning in. And of course, with that said, let's begin today's video. Now here's the big news though, because the number of houses for sale nationwide, or housing inventory, increased by 0.7% this November compared to 12 months ago. Of course, that may not sound like a lot though, but again, inventory levels tend to decrease in November each and every year. So much so that inventory this November increased by 2.4% compared to the previous month. The first time that inventory has increased this late in the fall season since our records started back in 2016. However, despite the small monthly and annual increase, inventory is still down by about 37.8% compared to pre-COVID levels. Now here's a chart looking at inventory levels going back to 2017, which I love because most websites such as Redfin only share data going back to 2020 on their Redfin's data center website here. So here at the above here, at the top of this chart here is what I want to say here, is that in 2017, that's this blue line right here. 2018 is this orange line. In red is 2019. Obviously, as you can see in November, inventory tends to decrease compared to October. And in fact, inventory levels tend to peak in general in the late summer months and not in November or October here. So the average going back to 2017 through 2019 is approximately 1.2 million houses for sale. Now there's only 755,000. So even though it has been increasing steadily all year, we're still well below pre-pandemic levels. Something to keep in mind though is that I don't want you guys to think that we need to see inventory levels increase to 1.2 million in order to see home prices decrease. Because keep in mind, in 2022, inventory levels didn't surpass approximately 760,000. So inventory levels were way below pre-COVID levels. But given that the surge of inventory occurred, especially in the spring months, that's why prices really corrected in the last half last year, going from approximately 350,000 houses for sale in February, then surging or doubling by the time we hit July at 700,000. So a sharp rise of inventory is why home prices decreased so much last year. And on top of that, because rates were increasing as well, of course, right? Something worth mentioning as well is that inventory right now, again, is only up by 0.7% compared to 2022, but it is still higher compared to 2020, which is right here, as well as 2021, which is right there. Part of the reason why inventory levels is still increasing late in the season is due to fewer contracts being signed between buyers and sellers. So therefore, it's taking longer for houses to sell, and that's increasing inventory levels right now. It says here the number of houses under contract with a home buyer, but are not yet sold, in other words, pending home sales, decreased by 3.6% compared to 12 months ago. Pending sales are an early indication of the direction of closed home sales in the next 1 to 2 months. And like I mentioned in previous videos, according to the National Association of Realtors, for the month of October, the seasonally adjusted annualized rate, so the current sales pace of home sales of existing houses, decreased to 3.79 million. That's the lowest levels going back to August of 2010. So more or less a 13-year low based on the current sales pace for October. And because pending home sales have been still decreasing, it's going to be really interesting to see where we end up at the end of the year to see how many houses actually sold this year. Something I want to share with you guys is that the difference between this year and last year, again, has been getting more narrow here. So from January through approximately May, the difference between this year, which is right here in pink, compared to last year in gold, was great. So in January, for example, last year, there was around 450,000 pending listings compared to only 300,000 this year, a delta of around 150,000. Now it's more or less right on par with last year's levels at around 355,000. So right now, more or less what we're seeing right now is a decrease of pending home sales, which is normal during this time of year, but it's not falling as fast as last year's levels, at least based on data from Realtor.com. Another reason why inventory levels is still increasing here is because the number of new listings increased by 7.5% compared to November of 2022. That marked the end of a 17-month streak of decreases of the number of newly listed houses for sale. So in other words, new listings were falling compared to the previous year for 17 consecutive months. And now we're actually above last year's levels. Let me just zoom in here. So right here is this year, right now, there's around 317,000 newly listed houses for sale this November, higher compared to last year. One of the reasons why we have more new listings compared to last year, though, is because last year, new listings basically fell off the cliff here. And that's why we're actually up right now. What's interesting to me here, and you guys may have seen this as well, this mess right here is more or less 2017 through 2021. Here's 2022. So we're getting very, very close to having the number of houses being listed for sale on par with pre-pandemic levels. So once they report December's numbers in about 1 month from now, it's going to be really, really interesting to see where we'll end up at, because we could be in a scenario in which newly listed houses, or the number of new listings, is roughly on par with pre-pandemic levels. Of course, having said that, it would be entirely normal to see new listings, fall off a map in December as we approach the holidays. That is seasonality regarding our housing market here. Realtor.com also touched on how each of the 50 most populous metros fared regarding inventory levels here. It says inventory increased in 20 of the 50 biggest US cities compared to 1 year ago. The metros in which they saw the biggest increases were Memphis, Tennessee, a gain of 25%. New Orleans also increased by 25%. Then we had San Antonio, Texas, rounding out the top three. Despite higher inventory growth compared to 1 year ago, most of these markets here experienced decreases compared to pre-COVID levels, excluding two markets. So Austin, Texas saw a gain of 14.4%, and San Antonio, Texas saw a gain of 13.6% in the levels of inventory compared to the same month in November in 2017 through 2019. So just taking a step back here, this is one of the reasons why San Antonio, Texas and Austin, Texas are experiencing decreases in prices compared to 12 months ago, whereas other areas such as Milwaukee, Wisconsin, for example, other areas in the Midwest and the Northeast are experiencing increases in prices compared to 1 year ago. Realtor.com also shared that in November, 34 of these 50 biggest cities experienced an increase of new listings. The metros that saw the biggest gains were Orlando, increasing by 22.9%. After that was Hartford, Connecticut, and Kansas City. In contrast, the biggest declines were Richmond, Virginia, down by 17.2%, Las Vegas, and San Francisco. Let's also talk about how fast or how slow houses are selling right now. So days in the market is at 52 days. That's actually 3 days shorter compared to 1 year ago. So this means that houses are selling about 3 days faster compared to last year's levels. On top of that, when comparing the average November in 2017 through 2019, houses are taking about 17 days faster to sell right now. Time in the market is rising more slowly this year than is typical during this fall season, as limited inventory is spurring home buyers to act quickly. I would add an asterisk there saying that limited inventory, historically speaking, is still very low. But as I share with you guys, inventory is getting very close to pre-pandemic levels. Regarding days in the market, as you can see right here in pink, is this right here. So days in the market has been seen as seasonal increase, but it's not increasing as fast as 2017 or through 2019 during this time frame here, but still selling faster compared to 2022 as well as 2020, but not as fast as what we saw back in 2021. Let's also talk about home prices here, because they talk about the median list price nationwide that actually decreased from $425,000 to $420,000 this November. It says list prices remain relatively stable compared to the same time last year, growing by just 1%. Listing prices have been buoyed by scarce inventory compared to pre-pandemic levels here. Let's also talk about the share of price reductions. This is the amount of people who are dropping their asking prices because they're not getting an offer to get their house sold, right? So the percentage of houses with a price reductions decreased from 20.2% last November. Now it's at 18%. And they say here this month, the share of price drops did decrease seasonally. However, the decline was less prominent than previous years. A greater share of price reductions could be a signal of softness in listing prices. In other words, if you list your price or list your house for sale for $500,000, you don't get any offers in about a month or two, you're probably going to have to do a price reduction in order to attract a home buyer. And they're saying here that because the increase of price reductions is actually a little bit higher compared to previous years, this could be a sign that some home sellers are actually overzealous right now. They also provided how each of these stats here fared for each of the 4 major US regions here. So active listings, the change compared to November of 2022, all decreased for each of these regions here, except for the South. That experienced a small increase of 3.7% versus the West fell by nearly 20%. New listings increased on a year-over-year basis, but again, less than 5%. Also, asking prices increased as well. The smallest gain was actually in the South, up by 3.2%, whereas the Northeast increasing by 7.8%. Let's also talk about how each of these metrics here fares compared to the average November in 2017 through 2019. As you guys can see right here, active listings as well as new listings fell compared to the pre-pandemic average here. Active listings decreased the most in the Northeast, falling by 55.6%, all falling by more than 20% here. New listings also decreased by double digits. The biggest decline was actually in the West, down by nearly 31%. That's wild. But again, talk about a lack of housing affordability. Listing prices increased by more than 29% for each of these markets here. In fact, the biggest increase again is actually in the Northeast, up by 38.1%. Also in this report here from Realtor.com, they provide how each of these 50 biggest metros fared which I will not share in today's video. Otherwise, this video will be 13 hours long. Instead, I'll provide a link in the video description below regarding this report, just like I do for all my videos. If you guys are still watching today's video, I appreciate you. Have an awesome day. Like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next video.